on Arirang News. South Korea is waging a war on the fast-growing number of drug crimes by launching a large-scale investigation. President Yoon vows to eradicate illegal drugs as he says they're destroying young people's hopes and dreams. The U.S. government announces a list of car models eligible for up to $7,500 in tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act. But it leaves out models of Korean automakers Hyundai and Kia, as well as other foreign car makers. China starts the year with solid economic growth of 4.5% on-year in the first quarter, slightly above the market's expectations. This on the back of a rise in household spending with the end of the country's zero-COVID policies. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in South Korea. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We begin with the country's war on drugs. South Korea was once known as a drug-free country, but recently it has been seeing a fast-growing number of drug crimes, some even involving teens. With this, President Yoon today called on his cabinet to take strong measures to root out illegal drugs. Our presidential office correspondent Kim Do-yeon starts us off.
President Yoon expressed concern over the rise in illegal drug use in Korea and called for a comprehensive campaign to fight it. He said it's especially shocking how prevalent drugs are for teenagers.
지난 10년 전까지만 해도 대한민국은 검찰, 경찰은 물론 해경, 보건당국, 세관 등 많은 기관의 협력과 노력으로 마약 청정국을 유지할 수 있었습니다. 그런데 어느 순간부터 정부 당국의 방치로 마약이 국민의 건강과 정신을 황폐화시킬 뿐 아니라 청소년의 꿈과 희망을 파괴하고 있습니다.
This came as President Yoon held a cabinet meeting this Tuesday morning. In his opening remarks, which were broadcast live, he also emphasized that the number of drug-related convictions is expected to surpass 20,000 this year for the first time. He made sure to set a deadline and call for relevant agencies to work together in eradicating the drug-related crimes.
He re-emphasized that all government agencies should come up with a plan together to respond to the growing illegal drug problem, so there could be a clear result by the end of this year.
During the cabinet meeting, President Yoon also shared his intentions to root out nepotism in the workplace, underscoring that it violates the country's constitution. This, as he said, the core of labor reform in South Korea is upholding the rule of law. He also urged relevant ministers to give priority to budget management to ensure productive government spending, saying the blind distribution of cash and patronizing populist policies need to be rejected. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Given the gravity of this matter, a pan-government mission was rolled out today to eradicate drugs, like heavier punishment and stricter investigations. Our political correspondent Han Sung-woo has what those are.
Following up on President Yoon Suk-yeol's declaration of war against drugs, the South Korean government has laid out ambitious new plans designed to drive drugs out of the country. First, it's planning to set up a drugs and organized crime division under the nation's prosecution service that will strengthen the prosecution's power in investigating drug crimes. Those investigations will be supervised by another new body consisting of a combined total of 840 officials from not only the prosecution but also the police and the Korea Customs Service.
The government will, in particular, focus its investigations on drug circulation targeting teenagers, the distribution of drugs via the internet and large-scale smuggling. We will also track down related money flows and completely deprive criminals of any illicit profit.
Minister Bang also explained during Tuesday's briefing that Korea will start making use of state-of-the-art equipment to better detect new types of drugs and reinforce its surveillance of medical drugs distributed illegally. Criminal punishment will be pushed up a notch as well. The Yoon administration's pushing for the Supreme Court's Sentencing Commission to strengthen its sentencing guidelines on drug crimes, especially on repeated offenses and large-scale smuggling. At the same time, though, the government's looking to expand rehabilitative care and addiction treatment. It has pledged to increase funds for the 24 hospitals nationwide officially designated as addiction treatment providers, and also establish one more nationally funded Addiction Rehabilitation Center. 한성우, Arirang News.
In New York, the United Nations Security Council has failed to reach an agreement over a possible response to North Korea's latest launch of a new solid-fuel Hwasong-18 ICBM. This with China and Russia finding fault with the United States military drills in the Korean peninsula. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Last Thursday, North Korea fired its solid-fuel Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missile for the first time. The United Nations Security Council responded by holding an open meeting at UN headquarters in New York on Monday, with the meeting being convened at the request of South Korea, the United States, and Japan. During the meeting, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield strongly condemned North Korea's repeated violations of Security Council resolutions, calling for a united response from the international community on what she called a threat to not just Northeast Asia, but also to world peace and security. Along with the U.S., other UNSC members, including Britain and France, expressed concerns over continued provocations from North Korea. But China again backed its ally, saying that United States military exercises near the Korean peninsula using nuclear aircraft carriers and B-52 bombers made North Korea uneasy. Russia's ambassador to the UN also slammed the U.S., saying that the UNSC meetings should not be used for political propaganda purposes, adding that additional sanctions against North Korea is illegal and unilateral and would not take into account the desperate situation inside the country. Meanwhile, in a statement carried by the state-run Korean Central News Agency, Vice Chairman of the Central Military Commission of the ruling Workers' Party, Lee Byung-chul, accused the UNSC of engaging in domestic interference against Pyongyang. He also stressed that the North's advanced strategic weapons development is a legitimate self-defense measure aimed at defending itself from threats from the U.S. Lee also slammed the U.S. for calling the North's exercise of rights to self-defense a provocation and threat through the mobilization of the UNSC. The vice chairman is known to have led Pyongyang's nuclear and missile development since the early months of Kim Jong-un's rule in late 2011. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The foreign ministers of the G7 nations have strongly condemned North Korea's recent series of ballistic missile launches and demanded that the regime refrain from further nuclear and missile tests. In a statement on Tuesday following the G7 foreign ministers meeting in Japan, the top diplomat said such provocative actions must be met with a swift, united, and robust international response, including further significant measures by the UN Security Council. They added the North's actions undermine regional stability and pose a grave threat to international peace and security. The warning from the G7 comes 3 days after Pyongyang said it had successfully tested a solid-fuel ICBM last Friday. President Yoon Suk-yeol will host South Korea's first-ever summit with Pacific Island nations next month, advancing the country's Indo-Pacific strategy. According to Yoon's office Tuesday, the South Korean president will chair a summit in late May with more than a dozen countries, including Australia, New Zealand, 14 Pacific Island states, and 2 French territories among those invited. The summit will focus on strengthening cooperation in the Blue Pacific in order to respond to common challenges in the region such as climate change, disaster response, and regional development, and pursuing common prosperity. This marks the first time for Yoon to host a multilateral forums of state leaders and is a step forward for Seoul's own Indo-Pacific strategy announced in recent months. The U.S. Treasury Department has shortened its list of electric vehicles eligible for federal tax incentives under its Inflation Reduction Act. South Korean auto giants Hyundai and Kia were not on the list as widely expected, but market pundits believe the short-term challenge will lead to long-term returns. Our Choi Soo-hyung explains why.
The U.S. government announced on Monday local time that 16 electric vehicles would be eligible for subsidies of up to $7,500 in accordance with the detailed guidelines of the Inflation Reduction Act. All the 16 selected models are American-made, including Tesla's Model 3 and Model Y, Chevrolet's Bolt and Equinox, and Ford's E-Transit and Mustang. As a result, not only Hyundai and Kia by Hyundai Motor Group, but also Nissan and some American-made electric cars that were originally eligible for subsidies have been excluded from the list. The new guidelines for the IRA have reduced the number of eligible models significantly as battery requirements were strengthened in addition to the final assembly requirements in North America. If more than 50% of the battery parts are manufactured and assembled in North America, a subsidy of $3,750 will be given. An additional subsidy of $3,750 is given when more than 40% of the key minerals are mined and processed in the United States or FTA countries. In this regard, industry officials have analyzed that the decrease in the number of eligible vehicles overall is not the worst situation for South Korea because the number of vehicles getting the benefits has been reduced from over 40 electric vehicle models.
In the long run, South Korea is actually going to benefit greatly from this because the estimates right now are that in a few years, South Korean firms from LG, Samsung, and SK On will make and basically be most of the batteries in the United States, up to 69% of them. And so while there will be short-term challenges for Hyundai and Kia, for South Korean battery manufacturers, this is going to be a boon.
In response to the IRA guidelines, Hyundai Motor Group is speeding up the construction of an electric vehicle and battery plant in Georgia, set to open by 2025, and it is also considering replacing the Chinese-made batteries for the GV70 model with North American-made batteries. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
South Korea has decided to extend its fuel tax cut measures until the end of August. They were due to expire this month. The nation's finance ministry announced on Tuesday that despite concerns about the government's tax revenue, which recorded its greatest ever on-year decline earlier this year, it decided to continue with the measures in order to ease the burden on people's livelihoods. It added that the recent announcement by the OPEC Plus about production cuts was taken into consideration. With oil prices hitting record highs around the world last year, South Korea has been offering a temporary concession on fuel. Under the extension, tax cuts on gasoline remain at 25%, while the rate for diesel is unchanged at 37%. In China, its economic growth beat market expectations in the first quarter, marking a 4.5% growth on-year as consumers returned to shops and restaurants following the end of its zero-COVID policies. Our Kim Jung-sil has what this means for the world economy.
China's National Bureau of Statistics said on Tuesday that the country's gross domestic production grew by 4.5% in the first quarter compared to the same period last year. The number is smaller than Beijing's recent growth target of around 5%, but is bigger than Reuters analysts' estimation of 4%. A boost in household spending was pointed out as one of the key factors.
At the moment, it seems that what the Chinese government is focusing on the most is the growth of the consumer market. As there has been an increase in industries such as restaurants and other daily necessities, we can say that retail sales are currently driving the overall economy.
Last year, China's GDP expanded by a mere 3%, far short of the government target at the time of around 5.5%, as its strict zero-COVID policy hammered consumer spending. After mass street protests, the authorities finally scrapped pandemic measures back in December, and the economy has started to show signs of recovery. but experts say China will likely face challenges in the coming months due to an uncertain international economic environment.
First of all, American pressure against China is continuing and global demand is still contracted. If the US keeps raising interest rates further, it can restrict China's exports and things like that. So that's one challenge.
Regarding the effect China's economic growth will have on South Korea and the world, the same expert added that the outlook is rather positive because new consumer demand may be created as a result of the growth. He added that China's economic growth could set a positive tone for the global economy as well. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
A trade volume between North Korea and China has grown rapidly this year, almost to pre-pandemic levels. That's according to an announcement made on Tuesday by China's General Administration of Customs Service. Trade between the two in March rose by $158 million, up by 161% compared to last year. Exports from North Korea in particular rose by more than 470%. South Korea's Yonhap News reports that the increase in trade could be due to the settling down of the COVID-19 situation, followed by the easing of China's strict pandemic measures last year. A new report on climate change adaptation, the first of its kind to be issued by the Korean government, raises the alarm on warmer temperatures, saying that the nation's climate is warming at a faster pace than the global average. Our Lee Si-hoo reports on what actions to be taken.
South Korea's climate is warming at a faster rate than the global average. From 1912 to 2020, the average annual temperature in South Korea has increased by approximately 1.6 degrees Celsius, surpassing the global average of 1.09 degrees Celsius. This is according to the Ministry of Environment's report released Tuesday on the nation's sustained efforts and actions toward climate adaptation. Titled The Republic of Korea's Adaptation Communication, the report serves as the first of its kind submitted by Korea to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change as required by the Paris Agreement, an international treaty on climate change signed in 2015. The report notes that from 1968 to 2017, the sea level temperature in South Korea has risen by 1.23 degrees. This is 2.6 times greater than the global average of 0.48 degrees. The sea level from 1989 to 2018 has also risen by an annual average of 2.97 millimeters, surpassing the global average annual rise of 1.7 millimeters. To adapt to such change, South Korea has established a multitude of legal frameworks, policies, and institutional arrangements. Following the nation's first legal framework for climate change adaptation, enacted in 2010, the Framework Act on Low Carbon, Green Growth, in 2021, the Framework Act on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth for Coping with Climate Crisis was passed, with enforcement to begin a year later. The law requires the central government to monitor climate change and implement adaptation plans. The nation has also developed what's called the Master Plan on Carbon Neutrality and Green Growth, which provides guidelines for responding to climate change until the year 2050. Meanwhile, South Korea is actively sharing its experience in implementing effective adaptation plans. The Ministry of Environment in its report reaffirmed South Korea's commitment to working with the international community in achieving the global goal on adaptation established under the Paris Agreement. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
In Sudan, at least 185 people have been killed and a further 1,800 injured since Sunday as fighting intensifies between rival military factions in the country. Jung Eun-ju has the details.
Clashes between Sudanese government forces and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces have killed at least 185 people in Sudan across 3 days of fighting. According to the United Nations envoy to Sudan, Volker Perthes, a further 1,800 have been injured as the capital Khartoum has seen airstrikes and shelling. Perthes told reporters via video link that the warring sides are not currently giving any indication that they're seeking mediation or peace. The two sides held a brief ceasefire on Sunday to allow the wounded to be evacuated, although it was not clear how strictly they had stuck to it. People have been unable to leave their homes since Saturday when the fighting started. Health services have been widely disrupted, and doctors say most major hospitals are rendered completely out of service. Offices, schools, and petrol stations in the capital were shut on Monday, and water and power were cut across the city. There have been no police on Khartoum streets since Saturday, and witnesses reported cases of looting. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Monday urged for a return to calm, warning that further escalation could be devastating. The United Nations, the United States, and others have called for a truce. Egypt, which backs Sudan's military, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, which has forged close ties to the RSF, have also called for a ceasefire. The fighting is between the country's top two generals, Sudan's military leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and the commander of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. The former allies worked together to topple the ousted Sudanese president Omar al-Bashir in 2019 and played a pivotal role in the 2021 military coup. The eruption of violence follows rising tensions over the RSF's integration into the military as part of plans to restore civilian rule. 정은주, Arirang News.
On the entertainment front, BTS member J-Hope began his mandatory military service on this Tuesday, becoming the second member of the group to enlist, following Jin, who began his service last December. The 29-year-old begins 5 weeks of basic training at an army boot camp in Gangwon-do province. His enlistment comes as the group's agency Big Hit Music earlier this month announced that he would fulfill his mandatory service as an active duty soldier in the army. But there was no on-site ceremony for fans on the day over concerns of being too crowded. J-Hope hosted his last live stream on Weverse, a fan community platform, last Friday to say goodbye. In other K-pop news, girl group BLACKPINK has set yet another world record. This time, a Guinness World Record for being the group with most viewed music channel on YouTube with over 30 billion views. According to the record's official website, as of last week, BLACKPINK has registered more than 30.1 billion views on its official YouTube channel, beating a record set by Maroon 5 in 2018 of just over 9 billion views. This is the 21st world record involving BLACKPINK and its members. Some of their other achievements include the most subscribers for a band on YouTube and most streamed female group on Spotify.
Conditions will be close to those of early summer tomorrow. A strong high-pressure system will take over, bringing in a surge of warm air mass. Maximum temperatures in Seoul will be topping out at 27 degrees Celsius. Because conditions were quite breezy for the past couple of days due to the rain, tomorrow may feel hotter than the actual readings. There are some lingering showers across the south of the country. The coastlines of Jeollado and Gyeongsang-do provinces will see 5 to 20 millimeters. Jeju Island will see about 5 to 10. For these regions, rain is forecast to taper off on Thursday. Normally when temperatures rise, finest concentrations tend to soar as well. But for tomorrow, clean air will continue to take over. The entire nation will see air quality standing in the normal to good category. Tomorrow, Seoul and Gyeongju will be starting off at 11 degrees. Daytime highs will be jumping significantly. Seoul will get up to 27 degrees, Daejeon 29, Gyeongju will be topping out at 24 degrees. On Thursday, temperatures will be returning to the seasonal average. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all for tonight's newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with the latest news tomorrow. Have a good night.
I'm live! 저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 억지 펜션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고
좋아요.